Okay, this is Module 6, the first part of Module 6, but just before we get started on that, there's a lot of slides in Module 6, so we'll be doing some today and then quite a few at the end on junior sport and drugs in sport. So we'll do them in the next session, but I just wanted to go through your assessment brief fairly quickly here because this is the last component of your assessments and it is due next Sunday, and there will be no sort of changes to that time. It needs to be done by 11:55 p.m. next Sunday. So you do need to make sure that it is done. Now, the benefit you have is you've got some feedback already on your assessments to this point. And so effectively what we want to do is make sure that you understand where you've got good marks, that you continue to do that because this is worth 60% of your final mark. Where you haven't done so well, this is an opportunity for you to resolve those issues, add some content into the first part, which is now part of the second component. So I just need you to make sure that you've got this under control. Okay, so basically due next Sunday, 2,000 words, and the components, and this is a very important part of this, the components need to be there. So, you know, things like a mission statement or the goals and objectives, SWOT analysis, risk matrix, these things need to be in your assessment. So if they're not, you will be penalised fairly heavily. So going back to your original assessment or your original assignment, you have a list of activities that were required in there. Some of you left some of those out. This is a report, so it should have a title page. It should have now, because it's a final report, a table of contents. Microsoft Word does all this for you if you use it correctly, or you can do it manually. It's your choice. But you should also, and this is an issue that for all of you, make sure that you proofread your document before you submit it so that all of the spelling and grammar and everything is corrected. Now, Microsoft Word does a lot of that for you and highlights the things that are misspelled or grammatically incorrect. Please go through and proofread your document. If necessary, get someone else to proofread it just to make sure it presents as a professional document. Very, very important. Now, we've gone through some of these elements already in your first assignment. And as I said, if you've been scolded a little bit for not doing some of them or leaving them a bit light, you need to bulk them up and get through them and do a good job. But then we need to get into these final areas that weren't part of the original assessment. So things like equipment and uniform, venues and facilities, the seating capacity that you would need to run your sport, examples of a competition schedule. Now, some of you have done this already in your first submission, but then you need to go through and tidy all these things up. Maybe a proposed logo and colours and a branding of the sport's positions on ethics and social responsibility. Now, we're going to do some discussion about that in today's lecture, but there are many complex issues to do with ethics in sport today, not the least of which is wagering and gaming, use of performance-enhancing drugs and other things like that, the duty of care for coaches and managers. So it's a complex issue and one that is, arguably you could say, is still being resolved for many sports, but you need to take a position on that in terms of equal opportunity for males and females, on bullying or sexual harassment or whatever. You also need in this component to put in a proposed funding partner. So if you are going to have a sport that potentially could be televised, perhaps some of your money could come from the television channels. Some of it could come from commercial sponsors like Hyundai or Ford or General Motors or something like that. And perhaps there would be government grants, particularly if you're starting off with junior sport. There are often grants available when you are developing programs for young people, and many of you mentioned this, the value of health and exercise for young people in your sport. You need to start talking about that and why government would fund you on that basis. You've got to plan a proposed media launch, how you announce your new sport, and then in a conclusion, and this should be a full paragraph, convince the reader that this sport has a future, and it's a very important part of it. Use appropriate referencing. You, in some of these areas, particularly in ethics and sport and other things, you should be seeking information from other sports and using those as a benchmark perhaps, and so that's what I would recommend. Now, just before we finish on this section, I want you to also just check and make sure that you understand the rubric where the majority of your marks are coming from and what you need to get into these higher areas of marks. So, in terms of the contents and the purpose, the knowledge and understanding, 50% of that, so 30 marks on this knowledge and understanding. Highly developed understanding the field of discipline, discriminates between assertion or personal opinion and information substantiated by evidence. Then critical reasoning, defense of your argument, and then use of academic discipline conventions and sources of evidence as we go through. So that's all I really wanted to say about that. We've got a week to do this now. Some of you hopefully are well through this, and certainly you're going off the back of the assessments that you've already done. You should have those marks available to you now in comments, so please take advantage of that. All right, so let's just stop sharing that and go back and share the screen with today's slides. If we can get this to come to full page, we can. All right, so this module, as I said, got a lot of slides in it, up to 80 in fact, so we're going to get through some of them today, certainly the areas on ethics, and then we'll come back to the other areas later on in the next few days so that you can have a look at the areas of junior sport, drugs and other things. So let's get started. First off, professionalism. Now this is something that you guys are developing towards in the program that you're doing. And in effect, the traditional view has been behaviour like that of a person belonging to a profession. This is a pretty wide sort of comment, if you like, but the fact remains that if we go to an accountant or a solicitor or a doctor, they behave in a particular way. And we're now looking at that in sport. And I think one of the best examples of that, for those of you, and I know some of you do obviously because you brought it up in your sports about the NBA and other sports such as that. If you see these people interviewed after the match, they're all wearing $1,000 suits or $2,000 suits. Unfortunately, when you see a lot of our footballers interviewed after they've come out of after a game, and they look like they've got board shorts and thongs on. So it's just a view that we're trying to make these sports professional. The best players are being paid substantial amounts of money, and therefore the expectation is that they would present themselves in a professional manner as an example for young people coming through into the sport. The contemporary view is they have expert competence, so they're very good at what they do, and there's now this emphasis on training, service, efficient and effective management practice and ethical standards in what we do. Rugby league, because I come from Sydney with much more heavily rugby league population, the behaviours of some of our sporting players is sort of requires some sort of fairly lax views in terms of committing as to whether they understand what professionalism is. Certainly in terms of physical fitness now, these sports are very focused and with the medical support they have and everything else to make sure that they train. Now, I can remember years ago, because I'm, as you can see from the photo, pretty old, I can remember when friends of mine were playing rugby league for Manly Warringah in second grade and occasionally in first grade. Thursday night, they would have training on Tuesday and Thursday night. Thursday night after training, they would go to the pub. And I would be, because I knew a lot of these guys that went on to play for Australia and all the rest of it, they were at the pub having a few schooners before they went down the Pizza Hut, because the pub used to close at 10, before they went down to Pizza Hut and had a pizza and a few more beers. Now, you rarely see these players, except when there's no game time, you rarely see them out in social venues anymore for several reasons. They're harassed quite often, but also, in many cases, players are giving up alcohol for an entire season because of their commitment to their fitness. So it is something, and they're regularly tested for drugs and social drugs and everything else, and performance-enhancing drugs. So it is an issue that they need to deal with. Commercialism in sports changed our industry. We must engage in world's best practice and adopt professional standards. And it just goes without saying, if you want people to pay a high price to watch you on television or to attend a game, we want people to perform at a good standard, and it's a very important part of it. So just continuing on with these sort of definitions, professionalism, the utilisation of existing specialised knowledge regarding a problem domain, and a profession is an account, an occupation that requires extensive training and the study and mastery of specialised knowledge. Now, in a sport, that's skills-based. you know, and certainly there are players who have just a sort of an understanding of how a game works. And, you know, I've played a lot of sport in my life at reasonably high levels. And the fact remains that some players can do things that other players you can't teach. The skills that they have, you cannot teach. They just naturally move to a position that would advantage them. And it's just a natural reflex, if you like. Whereas we can train good athletes to do a lot of things, but they will never have that edge. And if you look at rugby league, people like Cooper Cronk, Jonathan Thurston, these people just have an ability to be in the right position at the right time. Gary Ablett and others, you know, similar in AFL. And, you know, it's just one of these things that we need to understand, that many things are based on our skill sets and our training. And so, you know, we just keep moving and moving forward to increase the professionalism in what we do. You look at the tennis players, you know, if they have a weakness, whether it's their serve or whatever, they spend, you know, countless hours working on that to make that no longer a weakness in their overall game. And it's very important that we understand that. In terms of professionalism in venue management, exercising specialised venue and facilities knowledge, an ethical principle in the pursuit of facilities and venue management tasks, issues and problems. Now, the thing about this is we can't expect people to pay a high price to come and watch a game if the environment is not up to that standard. So it's not only what happens on the field, it's what preparations we make beforehand, and this is a very important part of it. Two approaches to profession, of course. Conduct emphasises appropriate individual and organisation interpersonal and social behaviour at its core dimension. So not only includes on the field, but afterwards as well, interpersonal and social behaviour, as well as competence, ability, skills and competencies as the pivotal factors in professional behaviour. And, as I said, not everybody's got all the skills that you might need, but you need to go through that. In terms of the conduct approach, ethical behaviour must include a moral philosophical code that governs behaviour in a formal and systematic manner. So things like a focus on fairness, honesty, integrity, safety, authenticity, and legal propriety. Now, it doesn't mention in there that we shouldn't be highly competitive and do our absolute best to win matches or to take advantage in the normal run of a game. And, you know, we can play hard and we can play tough, but we need to play fair. In terms of individual image, etiquette, style, personality and attire, and as I said, some of our sports people in Australia don't quite understand that, but if you wanted an example, certainly the sport of golf is a great example of appropriate etiquette and style and the way people present themselves. And also, as I said, the NBA with players now, being interviewed after the match with their very expensive suits on. And, this is part of the sport. And the example set by people like Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal interviewed after and the way that they talk about their opponents and everything else is very much part of this. In terms of organisational image, you know, how the office is run, perceptions of efficiency and effectiveness, how we deal with inquiries from our customers, if you like, that's very important. In terms of service, provision of quality service and social sensibility, sensitivity and courtesy to people, very important. And the effort that we make and the application of effort. Professional does not come easily and requires enthusiasm, dedication and passion. I teach a lot of students in their final year of university going into commercial environments, you know, business, accounting, business and other things. And the thing about it is that when you go through a situation where you're going into interviews, one of the things that needs to shine out, if you like, is that you're enthusiastic. I had a session over summer for a particular class and the students had to make a 5-minute video on job application video. And many large organisations are requiring that these days. And I gave them, and I've mentioned this before, I gave them as an overall comment that they were boring, you know. There was no enthusiasm. Why would I want to employ someone who's going to sit there like a stuffed duck? You know, I want people that are going to say, well, I'm very enthusiastic about it. So it's a great opportunity. I would really like to have this opportunity to come and work for you. So that enthusiasm doesn't need to be false enthusiasm. It needs to be genuine, that you actually want that job. And you're going to, you're going to turn up and you're going to work hard and achieve the things that you want. It's the same in sport. You know, we have to have that enthusiasm to want to succeed. And if you don't, you'll soon be left behind. In terms of a competence approach, I guess there's some aspects. The ability, you need specific skills and abilities to get the job done, you know. Data acquisition and communication, networking and interviewing, reading and researching, interpretation and analysis, independent thinking, comprehension, application of knowledge. So when you're in a training situation, that you take on board information from coaches and specific skills coaches that can teach you to accelerate more quickly and to roll better when you hit the ground, and all these sorts of things. It becomes very important in terms of increasing your skill sets. And look at the consequences and responsibilities of our decision making. You know, we've seen recently, you know, some horrible press on Mr. Tomic, and Bernard is now accusing everybody in the world of, you know, cheating and doing all sorts of things. But realistically, he's got to look at the consequences and the responsibilities that he takes on when he walks onto a tennis court. And if you lie down in a match, you know, and don't contribute, well, then that's the impact. You know, you then get written about as being a quitter. And there's nothing worse in the Australian sort of culture than a quitter. So it's the way it is. Insight and vision, got to go out and gather information, interpret and plan for the future. Qualifications and experience. Sound practice is never achieved without training and experience. And it's interesting, I think, if you look back at world swimming records in the 1920s and 30s, basically the fastest swimmers were physically more dominant than other people. Today, none of those swimmers that are in the Olympics could have got there without massive amounts of training and skills design and everything else. And so it's not good enough to be taller or faster or anything any more naturally. You have to have both an ongoing training of skills and everything else, but also a mental commitment as well. You look at the golfers, you know, the people like, I was watching the end of the Farmers tournament the other day with Jason Day, 6 playoff holes that they had. And the final one in the afternoon, when they couldn't see, they showed the vision, they turned the camera filters off. It was dark. And he hit a ball, Jason Day hit a ball after hitting into a bunker and having to play out from well down the fairway. He hit a ball to about 5 feet from, you know, 170 metres away, 170 yards away. He couldn't even see the flag when he hit it. He just had to commit. And so this mental skill set, and then had to sink the putt. And then the player who was playing, Alex Noren, he also had to sink a putt to go to another playoff, which they started the next day. But fortunately for Australia, Jason Day won that playoff the next day when Alex Noren hit into the lake. And so there you go. It's not only those things, it's a whole lot of raft of things that we need in terms of competence and ability. And finally, working towards excellence. Now, we may never get perfect in sport. I don't know that there is a perfect in sport. But we certainly can work towards those goals of getting to absolute excellence in the things that we do. And again, enthusiasm comes up here. Lifetime learning, commitment, you know, listening to coaches, trying to improve all the time is just an endless thing. For all of the things that you do in your life, whether it's while you're a sports person or whether you're a business person later on or whatever you do, business owner, committing to improving all the time is a vital part of it, a very important part of the way businesses are run today. So how do we know what's, you know, the standard? Well, we look to what we call best practice, proven management methods that contribute to the most efficient and effective functioning of organisations and societies in which those organisations operate. Today, that includes effective and open communication. If you're not communicating properly, and there's no excuse for poor communication today, we have the facilities with email and everything else to be able to communicate openly and effectively at a moment's notice. You've got quality management, continuous improvement, as we mentioned earlier. We can't just stop today, because what happens is everybody else leaves us behind, and that's not good for our organisation. We need to have a level of culture consciousness, prepared to take risks. Management is about the management of, and success is about the management of risk. If you don't take any risk, you can't expect to get great rewards. In the same way, if you take massive risk, well, the reward needs to be massive, otherwise the risk is not worth it. So people who do, who climb mountains and things like that, they're taking a substantial risk. There's no doubt about that. But the reward for them is justified. If you are in business and someone offers you, $2 million if you'll walk to the corner, you've got to question whether that's really likely to be a valid opportunity. Whereas if someone said to you, over a period of time, if you do this and follow all these processes, in 12 years' time, you'll have $2 million. Well, then you can see the steps that are going to be there, and you can take the necessary smaller risks along the way to build up to this, overall reward. We need to have strategy and commitment. We need to focus on value for everything that we do. Value for the customer, value for our competitors and everybody else in the organisation and the competitions that we're in, so that we generate sort of goodwill, but also competitive goodwill, which is, no one resents that. And acknowledgement of the interdependence of organisation and society. So even though we may be just an organisation, a football club, we are part of a society. People, particularly young people, follow our sport, they follow our team, and they want to be acknowledged as part of the society in which we're in. And of course, for the wider society and the community and everything else, teams have to acknowledge that they are part of that. And, they're creating a culture, if you like. If you've got a sporting team in a country town, the town follows that. It reflects the energy in the town, often reflects the success of their local sporting teams. Over the years, of course, we've had some problems in all of this: decline in behaviour standards, growing concern about ethical issues in sport, including doping and a win-at-any-cost culture, child abuse, spectator violence, sexual assault and misconduct, and lack of respect for officials and opposing players. Now, as I said, some sports seem to not have any problems with this at all. I think tennis, as an example, has had a few doping issues and a win-at-any-cost culture in different events. But generally, you don't have too many issues there. I'm in the United States at the moment, and they've just jailed a gymnastics coach over here, and you've probably heard about this in the media, for something like 174 years. And this guy was arguably the medical provider for the most elite gymnastic athletes in this country, in the United States. But his behaviour has just been appalling. And over 100 people got up in front of court and said the things that he had done. And so, it's quite amazing. But, so it's the responsibility of officials and others to identify these things and to bring these people to account, because we just can't have them in our sports. Concerns about whether sport is engendering or tolerating violence and inappropriate cultures, and whether the conduct of athletes is in decline. I don't know that it necessarily is. I certainly think we have, and because the media is ever present and the mobile phone camera is ever present, I think we find these things out much more quickly. The media gets onto them very quickly, and so there is problems in terms of that. However, realistically, I think that one of the things that we do see today is a divide between the worst behaved players and the general population, and I think there's a big drop there. If sport loses its integrity and value as something worth honouring, it will have many detrimental effects, not least of all challenging the cultural importance that sport has in Australia. And there's no doubt that Australia is a sport-intensive country, and we like that. We've got the weather for it. We've got many programs in place to allow our athletes to shine, and we punch way above our weight in terms of the Olympic Games and other international competitions in a lot of sports. So what happens if we lose this integrity? Well, some of the negative effects: diminishing sport's ability to provide positive role models for young people, diminishing community support and respect. If you've got violence, crowd violence at sports, people won't take their kids along, so that becomes a problem. Diminishing its ability to be an agent of social cohesion. We want sport to bring people together, not to separate them. We start losing corporate support, and we've got many examples of this for different individuals, Tiger Woods and others, who have lost sponsorships, and of course, even teams that have lost corporate sponsorships because of the behaviour of some of their players. We start losing membership, increased litigation and insurance costs, and the media will turn on inappropriate behaviour of individuals or clubs very, very quickly. And it's hard to turn that around. We've spoken about this in terms of public relations and things in the past. The media is generally very happy to assist promoting a sport, but if things are not properly managed, they will turn you against you very, very quickly. So some of the common perceptions of sport: most people say they want what they want of sport is athletes who can achieve and win in a fair manner and act as good role models, participants to play not only by the rules of the game but in the spirit of the game, sport to be an environment that is enjoyable and untainted by cheating, violence, abuse and other unacceptable practices, and respect shown by all involved in sport, especially for decisions of officials. Now, you know, because I was president of a small junior, reasonable sized junior baseball club and softball club in Sydney, you know, we had about 600 members or something, 600 or 700 kids at one stage, only up to under 16s. We never really had problems with the players. It was the behaviour of the parents that were the major concern for us. And so, you know, you've got to look at how sports operate, that, you know, the rules are in place to maintain a level of behaviour and to make sure that cheating doesn't go on, and if it is found out, that it is penalised in terms of the results. Some of the ethical issues in sport, and we're going to talk more about these a bit later in this module, but things like corruption, gambling, cheating, bribery and match fixing. And I've spoken about this before. It's very difficult for us to watch any sporting event on TV now without the gambling organisations advertising during that session. And I think there will be a reaction to this by the government in the next few years, because it's become a major social problem. And so, you know, it also puts pressure on players to provide information and to do certain behaviours that are outside the legal running of the sport. We also have corporate governance, cronyism, which is bringing in your mates to look after things, paternalism, nepotism, bringing in family members to run certain things and paying them, favouritism, discrimination or bias in organisational and board governance, and the appointments of people to paid or voluntary positions. It appears to me, and I've been involved in a lot of these sort of environments, that oftentimes I think we should be like the American political system, where you can only serve for 2 sessions as a president or a chairman or something like that. Certainly, you know, some sports adopt that pattern in Australia. I know Australian baseball, normally people only stand for chairman's role for 2 sessions, but that would be 2 3-year sessions. But other people might also, you know, take